I'm ageist. There, I said it. I'm not proud of it, but I do embrace it. For a long time, I didn't realize I had age bias. And then I had an epiphany. I'm sitting across from my good friend George, and he is just radiating frustration. He's sharing stories about how he sent out countless resumes and not heard anything back. His shoulders are slumped, his hands are clenched. Now, when George and I met, we both worked at the same large multinational powerhouse company. I, the early career eager beaver, and him, the scientist savant responsible for next-gen technologies. Even then, I was in awe of his intellect. Now, a couple of years ago, George took early retirement. He had visions of his time spent on his favorite hobbies, kayaking, traveling, studying dark matter, the usual stuff. But slowly, George found that retirement kept feeling like isolating for him. And he missed solving hard problems. So he was anxious and desperate to get back into tech, and so that he could put his big brain to work and have other big brains to relate to. I don't think George or I ever imagined just how hard it would be for him to get a job again after the age of 50. The funny thing was, sitting there across from George, I knew exactly what those interviewers were thinking. And I suddenly realized I held the same bias that George was facing from others. I'm the COO of a Silicon Valley tech company. Hundreds of resumes cross my desk for every job opening, most of which only get a few seconds consideration. I wondered just how many resumes from people, brilliant, capable, dynamic people like George, I had scanned and dismissed. It's not like I looked at them and said, this person's old, so I'm not going to hire them. Instead, my gut said things like, this person looks like they're probably slow, probably dated in their technologies. They don't look like a culture fit. Next. I was part of the problem. And so from that moment, I set out to work on my own bias to make sure that my company and I never missed out on another George. Age bias doesn't carry a whole lot of really bad stigma in our society. So I was able to talk about it with my team, and I was able to talk about it with my colleagues, and in the end, we were able to put together a much better hiring process. But what about racism? What about sexism? Those carry some pretty bad social stigmas. I want you guys to do something with me. I want you to imagine, if you're a student, I want you to imagine you're with a group of your classmates. If you work, I want you to imagine you're with some colleagues, or you're just with a group of friends. Okay? Are you doing it? Are you with me? Okay. And then you say, I'm not sure if I made the right decision here. I wonder if I could be being influenced by my racism. Can we talk about that for a minute? Imagine a world where it was possible to have those kinds of conversations. Because I don't think many of us could embrace our biases well enough to do it, let alone be open to hearing, yes, actually, I think that was a little racist. Or, yes, I think some sexism did come into your decision. These issues are at the heart of social and business inequality for us. And we are never going to solve it if we can't learn to stop deflecting and to embrace our biases. Yes, that's what I said. We need to embrace our biases. And why is that so hard to do? Because today, any form of bias whatsoever is considered bad. And the person associated with that bias is automatically a bad person, maybe even morally flawed. So we can't acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we hold biases like racism or sexism, because under those conditions, we'd have to consider ourselves bad, morally flawed people. And we're not. So we can't be a part of the problem, not even a little bit. And how does that look when it plays out? Really good people with good intentions who want to be a part of the solution won't even have the conversation where they might be the villain. Because it's such a bad villain in our minds. So while some issues that carry less risk might get addressed, others don't even get looked at and never get better. Jack is the CEO of a technology firm. He and his company have had actually really good results from a program that he initiated to attract more women into his company. But most of them actually leave within 2 years. He wants to fix this. He goes out, he engages experts, he asks for advice, but then immediately and vehemently rejects any solution that implies that he or his team are biased for fear of being labeled as sexist. The risks are just too high. And because he won't go there, the underlying issues never get addressed. Let's fundamentally change the way we think about bias. And instead of thinking of it as this really negative trait of really bad people, embrace it. Bias is part of an amazing mechanism in our brains. Research shows that these things here are able to take incomplete and imperfect information, detect patterns, and use them to make decisions without consciously thinking about why. And when that mechanism works well, and the patterns we detect prove to be true, we call it things like intuition, gut instinct, sixth sense. And there's something to be celebrated, not denied. And it's that very same mechanism, when it doesn't work well and the patterns prove to be false, that we consider bias. For instance, you're going for a job interview for a new job at TEDxCU. The offices are super cool. And the salary is pretty great too. But your gut tells you that this might not be a great place to work. You are not consciously noticing and thinking about all the little patterns around the office that seem off. Your internal voice is just saying, I don't think the people who work here really care very much. A year later, they go bust. And boy, are you glad you didn't accept their offer. In this case, your ability to make a good decision without having to go into all the details of why is a great example of intuition. And throughout our lives, this ability undeniably serves us. But what about when it goes wrong? In these cases, our own brains are taking incomplete and imperfect information from our own past experiences and making decisions without consciously thinking about why, and we're not validating whether they're true. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we get it wrong. The danger comes when we get it wrong and the labels associated with our biases carry, like racism and sexism, carry such bad social risk that we won't even consider that we have them. So even our smallest biases go unchecked. But if we can embrace our biases as part of this powerful mechanism that's something to be proud of, and, this is really important, at the same time recognize that it can lie to us. It can mislead us, and we can be wrong. Then we can allow ourselves, heck, I would say require ourselves to stop being defensive, to be more objective, and to be willing to examine our decisions. Could I be being racist here? Yes, I said it. Racist. Could sexism have influenced my decision? Because that's just human. But being willing to address it, that's courageous. We may not always be able to stop our brains from forming flawed patterns, but we can choose whether and how we act on them. So how do we make that happen? How do we get from here to there? Well, first, we really have to get to know ourselves, which means you need to understand your biases. You have them, I have them, we all do. Take advantage of things like the famous Harvard Project Implicit Bias Test. It's free and it's online. Start noticing how you make judgments in your everyday interactions. It helps if you get really curious about the why of your decisions. Why did I want to hire Joe? Because he's a good leader. Why do I think he's a good leader? What evidence do I have? And here, really challenge yourself. Dig in layer after layer. Does that evidence support the conclusion you made? Or could it be a bias? And be real. Don't set out to prove that you don't have bias. Okay? Get excited about digging in and figuring out where you do. And then, and this one has been really important for me personally, enlist friends and colleagues who you trust, who can engage with each other and challenge each other in a way that feels safe. And then we have to go out into the world with it. And that can be really uncomfortable. It can be a bit embarrassing. No one wants to be racist. No one wants to be sexist. But we are. So be real. Look for the patterns. Notice the feelings and tendencies. Talk about it openly with your trusted group. And then take action to address it. Okay, I admit, it may be a while before we're ready to go out onto the rooftops and go, I'm ageist. But we are. So we need to be real, at least with ourselves. Thank you.